Hi, Misha here, and I wrapped up cat wings, and this is a plane that is kind of an honorary member of that group. It doesn't quite qualify. Cat wings was Grumman fighters with cat type names. Well, this doesn't qualify because it's not from Grumman, and its name is only tangentially cat. But still yet, it was nicknamed the Cat or Black Cat. We have the consolidated PBY Catalina. This is a patrol bomber used before and during World War II, after the war, Korea, and actually even after Korea. It had a rather lengthy service. And this model here is from Corgi Aviation Archive. It is a 1/72 scale die cast. This is the John Cruikshank, circa 1944. Catalina. This is a Mark IV Catalina from the RAF, which sunk a U-boat in the summer of that year. So this is to commemorate that. Cruikshank was greatly decorated for that action at great personal risk and the risk of his crew. A neat story and a really cool aircraft, and it's a biggin'. Wingspan wise, it's just about my largest model. Well, as always, the history. In the 1930s, so-called flying boats were very commonly used by navies. They had several benefits. Obviously, they could make water landings and whatnot. Also, they weren't limited on takeoff. They had an ocean they could use. So, they could be heavier, better armed, and whatnot than other aircraft. And originally, the U.S. Navy in 1931 looked at the consolidated P2Y and Martin P3M flying boats and adopted the Martin. But really, these were disappointments, both of them. They were underpowered. They didn't have the range, the endurance. They didn't have the bomb load or capabilities. So by late 1933, the Navy again contracted with Martin and consolidated to make a new flying boat, which would be a patrol aircraft. They also asked Douglas to participate. And really, it was pretty quick that Consolidated was the winner of this new set of trials. They submitted an updated version of their P2Y as the X P3Y flying boat. It first flew in March of 1935 and then was sent to the Navy for additional testing and product improving. And it was at this time the Navy decided, instead of just having a traditional patrol boat, a patrol plane, they wanted a patrol bomber, hence PB. So they sent the prototype back to Consolidated, and Consolidated set to work. The original XP-3Y had 4 .30 caliber machine guns and could carry 1 ton, 2,000 pounds in bombs. So they went back, they put more powerful engines. They also reworked some of the tail, and they were able to up that to 2 tons, 4,000 pounds in bombs that it could carry. Also, they upped the number of guns. Now, different versions of the Catalina will have different gun layouts, but for example, a common one would be 2 to 3 .30 caliber machine guns and 2 .50 caliber heavy Browning machine guns. And now we of course double the bomb load. The Navy would be sent back. Well, I should say that the new XPBY-1 prototype flew in May of 1936. It was then sent to the Navy, and they approved it. It became the PBY, and by the end of that year, a couple of squadrons were starting to fly these, and by 1937, it was growing into regular service. This was a multi-role flying boat. It is just under 64 feet long and has a wingspan of 104 feet. Now I want to compare that. The B-17 that I've already covered has a wingspan of just under 104 feet. This actually has more of a wingspan than a B-17. And a B-17 is about 74 feet long, so it's only about 10 foot shorter than a B-17. I also want to point out that a B-17's standard medium to long range bomb load was 4,500 pounds. It could do 6,000 pounds for short range, even 8 sometimes. But for medium to long range missions, the B-17 was at 4,500 pounds. This was 4,000. And the thing is, the Catalina had some range on her. The B-17's range was about 2,000 miles. This had a range of over 2,500 miles, nearly 2,600, and later versions could even go further. Now, that came at a cost. It was not a very fast plane. It could not quite top 200 miles per hour as its maximum speed, but really it was comfortable cruising at about 130 miles per hour. So, yeah. But it could stay aloft for a long time. In fact, it set several distance and endurance records during its day. So yeah, it was a good patrol craft. It was a good maritime bomber. And so it was firmly in service when World War II began. The name Catalina actually comes from our British friends. When they started to use these in November of 1941, they don't tend to use designations. They like to give their planes names, and so they named this Catalina. Now, America would kind of go with the name later in 1942. Therefore, it became officially the PBY Catalina. There are several versions, -1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Really, there's not really a reason to bore you with all the differences. They're minor. A lot of the times, it's just more powerful, better engines. You know, reworked rudder here, reworked fin there, a different gun placement there. They did add radar when they got up to the PB-5. That's an important update. They also added self-sealing fuel tanks and additional fuel tanks as time went on. But yeah, you get the idea. The plane was more or less not greatly changed throughout the war. So the British would start issuing these and using these in the Pacific, in the Atlantic, and they were used to do their best to protect convoys against U-boats, and they did a damn good job. They could carry depth charges, they could carry torpedoes or regular bombs, and they sunk 40 German U-boats in the Pacific. And I keep saying that, I apologize, it's late, guys. It's a Monday, I've had a long day. In the Atlantic. Early on, they had a pretty easy time of it, but later, the German U-boats would start to be fitted with deck guns that were anti-aircraft. So, the Catalina fleet would take a pounding from these guns, but they kept on going because it was the job, and they really helped win the Battle of the Atlantic in making the area safe for cargo ships. And since Britain is an island, I think it's still there today, isn't it, guys? This was vitally important not only for its war industry, but just for its people in general, to make sure they had the supplies to live. So it was very important to the UK. Of course, America and Canada also operated PBYs from our side of the Atlantic. So we were flying them into the Atlantic from this direction, and Britain from the other, and so this was the best they could do to try to take care of U-boat patrols. These were also used by the Soviet Union, and quite well liked there, but they're probably most famous for their use in the Pacific. Early on in the war in the Pacific, only this and the B-17 were available to be used as bombers. Of course, later you would have things like the B-25 and the B-29, but in 42, it was this and the B-17, and quite frankly, this was better suited to the Pacific. So it was used as a bomber. It was used again as anti-submarine. They also painted these black, nicknamed them Black Cats, and they used them in nighttime operations for interdicting. They harried Japanese freight and shipping, as well as soldiers on the ground. Australia also flew these. Later, they would mine Japanese ports and shipping lanes, dropping, mines into the ocean, which greatly impacted Japan's ability to resupply, another island nation there. And of course, they worked as search and rescue vehicles to much success. It's not really even calculable how many sailors and pilots' lives were saved because of the Catalina. So it wasn't just an aggressive plane. Far from it, actually. These were used as passenger transports, even airlines, basically. Their long range and endurance. They set very long flight records. They had flights that were 18, 20 hours. They even had some that went over 24 hours. They also carried mail. Quite a few Catalinas were used at one time or another as mail planes. Very versatile plane. These were mostly produced in America by Consolidated, but they were also produced under license in Canada. They would build a total of just over 3,300, with production ending in mid-1945. One thing I didn't mention on the specs, guys, like the B-17, the Catalina has a 10-person crew, pilot, co-pilot, radar operator, gunners, so on and so forth. So quite a large crew. It's also interesting that actually a PBY was the first casualty of the War in the Pacific, when the Japanese fleet was on its way to attack Pearl Harbor early on December 7th, a PBY intercepted them, took note, but was shot down by 5 Japanese fighters before it could report back. So actually the first Allied lives to be lost officially in the Pacific to Japanese hostilities were in a PBY. The PBY also started the Battle of Midway. It was one of these planes was the first to spot the Japanese fleet steaming towards that island. And they were just there at many historical events because, again, they were such a versatile, dependable, and relatively cheap aircraft. That was one reason Consolidated was selected over Martin and Douglas. They were more affordable and more adaptable. That was back when our government actually tried to save money on occasion. Oh, for those days of yore, am I right? Anyway, they were greatly loved and respected in Britain. But pretty much every ally had some PBYs and would continue to fly them throughout the 40s. They were in service with the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Air Force, actually all branches, all 4 and then later 5, of the U.S. military had the Catalina. And the Air Force, or earlier Air Force Air Corps, it was known as the O-10, O for observation. And these would be used both Air Force and Navy during the Korean War. And the final Catalinas would be retired out of American military service in 1957 when the Navy Reserves gave up their last ones. So a very respectable 20-year career. A very respectable 3,300 built, a respectable 9-year production run, and this plane is responsible for a lot of work in World War II, both taking and saving lives. Cool plane. One of my favorites, and actually in my collection. This is probably the oldest design. Certainly the oldest style design. I mean, this is a very classic aircraft. I mean, it has the high mono wing with the struts. We have 2 propellers. One neat feature of this model, it does have the, if I can find it, really hard to do for me. It does have the pontoons that come down on the wings, which were used, of course, as floats if it were to land in the water, because this was meant to function as a boat. So if it hit the water, we'd have these to stabilize the wings and help it float and take off. It also had retractable tricycle type landing gear, and this model features those, so you can display it with landing gear down if you wish, but as usual I do not. The Corgi model here is die cast, quite heavy. It's got the crew figures inside. It has bombs under the wings. It has the extra fuel tanks, blisters. It's just a very detailed, very quality feeling model. And it's, again, impressively very big. I mean, it's nearly as big as my B-17. So, there you go. I just saw this and thought, normally I don't quite get older aircraft like this, but for one thing, it was in service through the 50s, and it's just a plane I've always kind of liked. I just thought it was neat, because you don't see a lot of flying boat models. Alrighty guys, I think that's enough. Like I said, this is kind of an honorary Cat Wings plane. If you have any questions or comments, please do post them below. I apologize about the camera work in this one. It's as big and tall as this is. It's difficult for me. So, thanks for your understanding. But I hope you enjoyed it nonetheless. Any questions or comments, please do post them below. And if you could, like, share, and subscribe. And if you haven't, check out my other Cat Wings episodes. I start with the F4F and work my way through the F6 and F9 and on and on. Alrighty guys, this is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon next time.